Her hands did not shake. That was the first thing he noticed, that the girl kneeling beside him in the dark under the Route 9 overpass, threading a needle by the light of his phone propped against a concrete pillar, had hands that did not shake. She worked with the focused economy of someone who has done this before or has simply decided that shaking is not an option. And the distinction, at that particular moment, did not matter to the man bleeding on the ground. The needle was a sewing needle, salvaged from a kid in a Ziploc bag she kept in the inner pocket of her jacket. The thread was waxed linen, dark brown, the kind used for leather repair. The shoelace she had used to close the wound initially, pulling the gash in his left side together while she found what she needed, was still in place, the white cotton dark with blood. And she removed it with 2 cuts of a small blade and examined her work before she began. She said, without looking up, "This is going to hurt." He said more. She was right. He found out over the next 6 minutes that the girl knew exactly what she was doing, and that knowing what you were doing did not make it hurt less, and that the concrete under his back was cold in a way that was separate from everything else, and somehow worse, and that he was in no position to do anything except breathe and let her work. When she was done, she sat back on her heels and looked at the closure. She said, "Keep it clean. Change the dressing in 48 hours. If it gets hot or starts tracking red lines, go to a hospital. Don't wait." He looked at her. She was a teenager, 15, maybe 16, with dark hair pulled back from her face and the specific look of someone who has been living outside long enough that their eyes have taken on a permanent quality of watchfulness. She was wearing a jacket 2 sizes too large and boots that had been resoled with electrical tape. She had a cut on her own chin old enough to be healing. That she had not dressed. He said, "What's your name?" She said, "Nora." He said, "I know, your jacket." He looked at the patch on his chest. She was already repacking her kit. The overpass on Route 9 ran over the junction of 2 freight rail lines on the south side of Camden, Kentucky, and the space beneath it was what such spaces always are: concrete and noise and the particular smell of standing water and exhaust and decades of people passing through. The pillars were tagged back to their foundations. The ground was uneven, broken in places, with gravel and scrub grass growing where the concrete had heaved. During the day, it was a through route for people who knew the neighborhood. At night, it was something else, quieter, more particular, belonging to the people for whom it was the closest thing to shelter that the city offered. Nora Vasquez had been living under and around the Route 9 overpass for 11 weeks. She had a specific spot, a recessed section behind the second pillar on the east side, where the concrete curved back 6 feet and created a space that was sheltered on 3 sides. She had a sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees that she had found at a Goodwill with a broken zipper she had repaired with a length of paracord. She had a backpack with specific contents in specific places, because specificity was survival. She had a system, and the system worked, and she had been refining it for 8 months. Ever since she had left the group home in Louisville, that was technically a licensed placement, and was in practice something she did not think about after dark, if she could help it. She was 16 years old. She had been in foster care since she was 9, moving through 6 homes in 7 years with the competence of a child who has learned to make herself small in unfamiliar spaces and to assess within 48 hours whether a placement was safe. 2 had been good, 4 had not been good, in different ways. In the last, a group home in Louisville, 9 girls in a house built for 5, nights unwatched. A girl in the room beside Nora's, who screamed sometimes and whom no one came for, had been the last. She had filed 2 complaints with her caseworker. The caseworker had noted them. The notes existed in the file no one had read since they were written. She had left in March with her backpack and her sleeping bag and the sewing kit she had assembled over the preceding year, because she had been anticipating the decision and preparing for it with the thoroughness she brought to everything. She was not lost. She knew exactly where she was. She was on the streets of Camden, Kentucky, which was not what she wanted and was what she had chosen over the alternative. And she managed it with the competence and the loneliness of someone who has been on their own since they were 9 years old, in every way that mattered, and has learned not to need what isn't available. She had been asleep on a Thursday night in October when the sound of a motorcycle coming in fast and badly woke her, and she had come out from behind the second pillar to find a man on his side on the gravel 20 feet away, his bike on its side, 15 feet beyond him, the engine still turning over. She had assessed the situation in the way she assessed everything, quickly, accurately, without flinching. She had gone to him. Before we get to what Walt Greer did when he was able to ride again, subscribe if you're new here and drop your city in the comments right now. I read every one, because what this girl had been carrying for 8 months, and what she did with what she had in the dark under a Route 9 overpass, is not the end of this story. It's the beginning. Stay with me. Her name was Nora Elena Vasquez, and she was 16 years old, and she was the kind of person who goes toward the thing everyone else moves away from. She had been this way since she was small. Her first foster mother, the first good one, a woman named Mrs. Aldridge who had kept her for 2 years before a health situation had ended the placement, had called it steady. She said Nora had a steady quality that most adults didn't have, a capacity for being present in a difficult situation without adding to it. Mrs. Aldridge had told Nora this when she was 11, and Nora had not forgotten it, partly because it was true and partly because it was one of the few things an adult had said to her that felt like being seen rather than being assessed. She was small, 5'3", and slight the way of someone whose calories had been irregular for a long time. But she occupied space with a purposefulness that made her seem larger than her actual dimensions. She had a habit of going very still when she was thinking, which she was often doing, and which gave her, in those moments, the quality of something that had decided to be exactly where it was. She had a particular skill developed over 8 months of street life for reading situations accurately and responding to what was actually there rather than what she expected. This was how she had survived, and it was how she had known when she came out from behind the second pillar and found a large man bleeding on the ground beside a motorcycle, that the right response was not to run and not to call anyone, but to go to him and do what she could do. She had done it. When Walt could sit up, she had helped him to the wall, and she had cleaned the wound with the saline solution she carried in a travel bottle, and she had threaded the needle, and she had closed the gash in his left side with 12 stitches that were not pretty but were functional, which was the standard she applied to most things. She had dressed it with gauze from her kit and secured it with medical tape, and she had told him what to watch for and how long to wait before he needed a hospital. And she had repacked her kit with the efficiency of someone who might need it again tonight, which was always possible. Walt had watched her pack the kit. He said, "Where did you learn that?" And practice. He said, "Practice." She said, "I've been patching things for a while." She did not specify what things. He did not ask. He said, 8 months. He said, "How old are you?" She said, "That's not an answer." She looked at him with the specific assessment of someone deciding how much to give. She said, 16. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Is there someone?" She said, "I was going to ask if there was someone I could call." She said, "I know what you were going to ask. The answer is no." She said it without heat, plainly the way she said most things. "There's no one to call. There's no placement I'd go back to. And I'm not going to a shelter because I've been to the shelter on 5th and it's less safe than here." She paused. "I have a system. I'm okay." He looked at her. He said, "You just stitched a stranger's wound with a sewing kit in the dark." She said, "That's not normal." She said, "No, but it's what was here." He looked at the kit in her bag, at the sleeping bag visible through the open zipper of the backpack, at the resoled boots, and the jacket 2 sizes too large and the cut on her chin healing without treatment. He said, "Can I come back?" She looked at him. He said, "Tomorrow, or the day after. I'd like to come back." She assessed this. She said, "Why?" He said, "Because I owe you something and I'd like to figure out what." "I helped you." He said, "That's not how I see it." She looked at the gravel and the tagged pillars and the freight rail lines running south in the dark, and the specific quality of the Route 9 overpass at 11 at night, which was the quality of a place that was hers because no one else had claimed it, and she had learned to live in what no one else would take. She said, "If you come back, come alone." He said, "And bring something to eat. I'm not running a charity here." Something in his face shifted. He said, "Deal." Walt Greer was 59 years old and had been riding for 37 years and had a daughter he had not spoken to in 4 years. Her name was Katie, and she was 26 now, somewhere in the system. Not the foster system, the other one, the one that follows addiction and the decisions it makes and the places it leads. He had a number for her that was 8 months old, and he called it every few months and it rang and no one answered, and he left messages he was never sure she heard. He had lain on the cold concrete under the Route 9 overpass while a 16-year-old girl with steady hands closed the wound. And he had thought about Katie, with the helpless ache of a father who has run out of ways to help and has not stopped trying. Walt had come back the next day with sandwiches from the diner on Main Street and coffee, and they had sat behind the second pillar in the morning light, and she had told him about Mrs. Aldridge and the things she had learned in 8 months, and he had listened entirely. He came back the day after that, 4 times in 7 days. On the 7th day, he said, "I want to tell some people about you, not to report you, not the system. People I trust." He paused. "They might be able to help in a way that you get to say yes or no to." She said, "What kind of help?" He said, "The kind where you stay in control of what happens to you." She was quiet. She said, "That has not been my experience of help." He said, "I know. That's why I'm asking instead of doing." She looked at the second pillar and the sleeping bag behind it, and the 8 months of a system she had built with her own hands and her own judgment, and which worked because it was hers. She said, "What would you tell them?" He said, "The truth. What you did, what you have, what you need, what you don't want." She said, "And they'd come here." He said, "If you said yes." A long pause. She said, "How many people are we talking about?" Walt looked at her. He said, "I haven't made the calls yet, but a few." He made the calls that night. By the following morning, a woman named Diane Kowalski, who was the chapter's youth outreach contact and had spent 11 years working with homeless teenagers in 2 cities, had called Walt back with 3 names of organizations and 1 specific proposal from a chapter family in Lexington. A couple named Roger and Sue Mattingly, who had a spare room and had done this before, twice, with young people who needed a landing place while they figured out the next thing. Not a foster placement, not a group home. A room with people who had been vetted by people Walt trusted and who understood that the young person in question would leave if they wanted to and that the door would stay open if they came back. Walt drove to the overpass on Sunday morning and told Nora about the Mattingleys. He told her about the room, about Roger and Sue, about the fact that it was her choice, that there was no form, no caseworker, no system, just a couple in Lexington who had a spare room and who had been called by a woman named Diane who trusted Walt. Nora listened to all of it. She said, "What do they get out of it?" Walt said, "Nothing. They do it because they did it before and it mattered." She said, "People don't do things for nothing." He said, "Some do." He paused. "You did." He said, "I want you to meet someone first, before you decide. I want you to meet some people, and I want you to see what this is before you say yes or no." She said, "How many people?" He had been honest with her every time she asked him something, and he was not going to stop. He said, "A lot." She heard them before she saw them. The sound of them came from the highway and down the Route 9 on-ramp and under the overpass in a way she had never heard anything come before. Low and building and purposeful, filling the concrete space under the bridge in a way that changed the air. She was standing at the edge of the second pillar when the first bikes turned off Route 9, and she watched them come. 519 motorcycles. They came in from both sides of the underpass, filling the access road and the frontage road and the shoulder of Route 9 in both directions, and they came to a stop with the unhurried precision of people who had done this before and knew where they were going and had come because they meant to come, and they were quiet within 30 seconds of the last engine cutting, and the silence under the Route 9 overpass on a Saturday morning in October held 519 people, and one girl standing at the second pillar with her hand on the concrete. Walt came to her. He said, "You okay?" She looked at the motorcycles. She looked at the leather and the patches and the chrome under the overpass lights and the 519 people who had come to a concrete space under a freight rail overpass in Camden, Kentucky, because a 16-year-old girl with a sewing kit had stitched a stranger's wound in the dark. She said, "This is a lot." Walt said, "I know. I'm sorry. I tried to say a few." He said, "These are a few?" He said, "They wanted to come." She was quiet. A woman came through the group. Diane Kowalski, small and quick, with silver hair and the specific purposefulness of someone who has been doing this for 11 years and knows how to be present in a difficult space without filling it wrong. She came to Nora and introduced herself, and she did not try to touch her, and she did not say anything large. She said, "I hear you're good in a crisis." Nora said, "Walt says you're better than okay." Nora looked at Walt. Walt said, "I told the truth." Diane said, "I want you to know what this is and what it isn't. It isn't a placement, and it isn't a program, and it isn't anything you've seen before. It's people who heard what you did and wanted to show up." She paused. "That's all this is." They were not filling it wrong. They were standing in it the way people stand in a space that belongs to someone else. Carefully, aware of the edges. She said, "The Mattingleys." Diane said, "Sue's here if you want to meet her." Nora thought about it. She said, "Okay." She met Sue Mattingly in the space between the second and third pillars, away from the crowd, in the specific semi-privacy that Nora had identified as available the moment she started moving. Sue was 53 years old, and she had the practical warmth of someone who has raised children and worked in a school cafeteria for 20 years and is not performing anything. She told Nora about the room, the window that faced east, the bathroom she'd share with no one because it was adjacent to the room, the bus line 2 blocks from the house that went direct to the community college. Nora said, "I'm not enrolled anywhere." Sue said, "I know, I'm just telling you what's nearby." Nora said, "Twice. One of them went to college. One of them went somewhere else, and that's okay too." Nora said, "What if I leave? The door stays open." Nora looked at her. She said, "Nobody has ever said that to me." Sue said, "It's true whether I say it or not." Nora was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the sleeping bag visible through her backpack zipper, at the kit in her inside pocket, at the resold boots and the 8 months of a system she had built. She said, "I'd want to keep my kit." Sue said, "Of course." She said, "And I'd want to know I could leave." Sue said, "You can leave." Nora said, "And nobody would call a caseworker." Sue said, "Nobody." Under the Route 9 overpass, 519 people were being very quiet. Nora said, "Okay." She packed in 12 minutes. She knew where everything was. Walt helped her carry the sleeping bag to his truck. Diane walked beside her to the truck's passenger door, not holding her arm, just present. Sue was ahead of them, talking to someone from the chapter about the drive to Lexington. At the truck door, Nora stopped. She turned and looked at the 519 people. She had been invisible for 8 months. She had constructed her invisibility with care and maintained it with discipline because being invisible was how she stayed safe and out of the system and alive, and she was good at it. The 519 people had come to find her anyway. Not to take her somewhere. Not to process her. To show up in the space where she lived and be present in it the way she had been present on the gravel when Walt needed someone. And to ask, not require, not insist, to ask if she wanted something different. Walt said, "You ready?" She looked at the second pillar, at the recessed section behind it, where the concrete curved back 6 feet and created the space that had been hers for 11 weeks. At the gravel and the tagged concrete and the freight lines running south, she said, "Tell them thank you." Walt said, "You can tell them yourself." She turned. She said it once, clear, into the quiet of the overpass. "Thank you." The sound that 519 people make when they don't speak is not silence. It is full, the way a room is full when it holds something it was built to hold. She got in the truck. Walt drove north. The room in Lexington faced east. Nora stood at the window the first morning and watched the light come in the way it came in from that direction, which was the way she had always preferred. Direct and unambiguous. Not bounced or filtered, just the light itself arriving. She had her backpack on the chair by the window and her kit on the nightstand and her sleeping bag on the bed because she was not ready to use the duvet yet, which Sue had said was fine. She had been there 4 days when she found the community college's GED program online. 6 days in, she rode the bus downtown to the enrollment office and came home with papers that she filled out at the kitchen table while Sue made dinner and Roger asked whether she wanted the radio on or off. And she said on, and he turned it on, and they did not make it a thing. She kept the kit. She kept it in the inside pocket of the jacket 2 sizes too large, which she kept wearing because it was hers, and it worked, and she had resolved the boots, and she knew how to take care of what she had. Walt drove to Lexington on the first Saturday of November. He sat at the Mattingly's kitchen table and drank coffee, and Nora sat across from him and they talked for an hour. And she told him about the GED program and the route on the bus and the window that faced east, and he listened the way he listened to things that mattered. She said, "You never told me about your daughter." He looked at her. She said, "The jacket and the way you listened, and you kept coming back." She paused. "You have a kid somewhere who's not okay." He said, "Katie, 26. She said, "What happened?" He told her the way he had not told most people, simply without managing it, because Nora had steady hands and he had learned that about her. When he was done, she was quiet. She said, "She knows you're looking." He said, "I hope so." She said, "She knows." She looked at her coffee. "You kept coming back under that bridge." People who do that, the ones you're looking for, know it, even when they can't say so. He looked at her. She said, "No." She said, "Keep calling." He said he would. He drove back to Camden in the November afternoon, on the highway this time, not the back roads, and the sky was wide, and the light was low and going gold at the edges. And he thought about a 16-year-old girl who had gone toward the thing on the gravel instead of away from it, and had steady hands in the dark, and had packed in 12 minutes and said thank you to 519 strangers like it was something she had been waiting to say for a long time. He thought about Katie. He called the number. It rang. On the fourth ring, someone answered. Some people fall through every net that was built to catch them. They fall through 6 placements and 2 complaints that got noted and filed and not read, and they end up in a concrete space under a freight overpass with a sewing kit and a system that works because they built it, and it is theirs. And sometimes a patch of ice on a county road sends a stranger sliding into that space, and the person who goes to help is not the one anyone would have expected, and she has steady hands, and she does not shake, and 500 engines find her, and a room faces east. If this story reached you, if you believe that every person who has been failed by the systems built to help them still deserves someone to come looking, share it tonight. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop your city in the comments. And if you know someone who was told the door would stay open and it did, or if you are the person who kept the door open, type second pillar in the comments. I read every single one.